reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the author of the underlying legislation, and also for someone who has been instrumental in making sure that we could work in a bipartisan manner to get it done to the floor today.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'd like to thank Chairman Garrett and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of my legislation, H.R. 2682, the Business Risk Management and Price Stabilization Act of 2011. H.R. 2682, I'm very proud to say, is truly a bipartisan bill. And I would like to thank my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, especially Mr. Peters of Michigan, Mr. Austin Scott of Georgia, and Mr. Owens of New York for working with me on this extremely important issue. H.R. 2682 will clarify Congress's intent under the Dodd-Frank Act and provide an explicit exemption from having to post margin for true commercial end users of over-the-counter derivatives. Despite clear legislative history to the contrary, regulators continue to misinterpret the Dodd-Frank Act, giving them authority to impose margin requirements on end users. This bill will ensure once and for all that true end users are not subjected to margin requirements that Congress never intended to be applied, and make sure that regulators do not attempt to exercise authorities they were never granted by Congress in ways that will certainly do harm to the economy, specifically by diverting working capital away from investment and expansion, which fuels economic growth and certainly job creation. True end users are firms and companies that use derivatives to manage their various financial risk. For example, firms use these products to lock in the cost of raw materials that they're going to need in the future, which ultimately protects American consumers and creates jobs here in America. If true end users were required to post margin, their hedging costs may become so high that they could abandon the practice, leading to great price variations for raw materials and ultimately an increase in consumer prices for a whole host of products, from food to energy. At a time when constituents in Staten Island and Brooklyn are struggling with sky-high tolls, rising gas prices, they simply can't afford to pay more for items they rely on every day. Furthermore, this legislation will not only help to keep consumers' prices stable, but will also protect U.S. jobs. The cost savings end users will realize will not only be required to post margin, will free up capital for business expansion and job creation. In fact, it's been shown that imposing a 3% margin on over-the-counter derivatives held by S&P 500 companies could cut capital spending by $5.1 to $6.7 billion. That could lead to 100 to 130,000 job losses at a time when unemployment is 8.3%. This cannot be overlooked or overstated. Finally, without this clear exemption provided in this legislation, I believe that U.S.-based commercial end users may attempt to continue hedging and avoid posting margin by moving their derivatives products overseas. That would put U.S.-based financial institutions at a major disadvantage and, as a consequence, drive even more U.S. jobs overseas. In addition, this could also encourage regulatory arbitrage and actually increase systemic risk to a worldwide financial system. In closing, I ask that my colleagues support this common sense, bipartisan, pro-jobs legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise